Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac, an all-baseball podcast for the best fans in baseball. And this week, we are discussing increased revenues versus the decreased salaries of players. I had a whole episode planned out with research and notes, but a trending topic in the news and the baseball world caught my attention, and it was Jake Arrieta's tweet about player salaries. We've kind of been seeing this whole offseason and definitely last offseason that the free agent contracts and the salaries that were given out were not what people were used to seeing. That has continued into this offseason, and there's definitely been talk about whether players are going to see these long-term deals anymore, these high dollar value contracts, and how much of that's going to get handed out. But Jake Arrieta specifically tweeted a comment about the 1 to 3 year players, meaning, guys, rookies through their third years before they hit arbitration. He said, quote, "All of you 1 to 3 year players out there better be paying attention to what's going on in our game. You're next." And he included at MLB. So presumably he's a little miffed about the way some of these contracts are being handed out, and guys aren't getting their due, so to speak. Now, keep in mind, Jake Arrieta went through this last spring in offseason before eventually signing a 3-year, $75 million contract with an AAV of $25 a year, plus a couple of option years in there. So the team can actually, I think at the end of this season, they can decide to extend that contract 2 more years for a total of $40 million. So not exactly something to complain about, Jake. You got 5 years, potentially 5 years, potentially $115 million. Now, that's not what you were wanting, but that's a pretty good contract for an aging pitcher whose numbers have been on the decline. So we won't get too far into Jake Arrieta and his numbers or anything, but he was kind of the impetus for this episode. He made the comment, it made the news, people are talking. So I thought we would kind of take a look at revenues, profits, salaries, whether that's changed over the years, what's the direction it's headed. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Where do fans, weigh in on it? So let's take a look at we'll start with this past season. So the 2018 season, there was an article by Forbes in 2018. It was actually referencing the 2017 numbers, but they were talking about teams with the top revenues and operating incomes, and it ranked all the teams, and so you could kind of go through and see where your favorite team stood, or who were the top performers, or whatever. So let's take a quick look. The 2017 numbers here were the Yankees were the top revenue at $619 million. The Dodgers were second at $522 million. The Cubs were third with $457 million. So the top 3 were Yankees, Dodgers, Cubs, and the Cardinals weighed in at 7th at $319 million. So $619 million in revenue for the Yankees, $319 million in revenue for the Cardinals. And all the way at the bottom were the Oakland Athletics at $210 million. So that's the revenue. Now, operating income or profits is a pretty different story, and I'm not entirely sure how they're calculating operating income. They're defining it as, let's see if I can find it here. They say revenue and operating income, and in parentheses, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Measure cash in versus cash out. So I did see another article that referred to operating income as just profit. So the reason why I kind of put that disclaimer on that is because the Yankees, with their $619 million in revenue, have an operating income of only $14 million. The Dodgers have an operating income of $68 million. The Cubs, interestingly, have an operating income of $102 million. So again, the Yankees with $14 million, the Cubs with $102 million. Now that kind of goes against the narrative we've heard where the Cubs don't have any money to spend. They can't get these free agents because they don't actually have as much money as we all think. So again, they're third in revenue, but they're actually top in profits or operating income. So again, I'm not sure exactly what all goes into that and how that factors in. But the Cardinals, again, in seventh with $319 million, have $40 million in operating income or profits. So I think there's this this thought that by fans that all these owners are sort of in the same boat. They're all profiting these huge amounts. They get hundreds and hundreds of millions from TV deals and ticket sales and whatever. And they all just make tons of extra money, and they can afford to sign any player they want and do anything they want. And the owners are these bad guys who are just making all this money off the fans and the players. But in reality, every ownership group is different. You've got some that are, single family owners. You've got multiple owner groups, some with 2 or 3, some with 5 to 10, owners. You've got completely different markets. You've got completely different businessmen and women who may or may not have interests in other areas with, profits in that or debts. You got all kinds of factors with these different owners as to what they can stomach for profits and losses. So I think it's a little naive to just lump all these owners together and say they should all be able to afford this and they should all be able to get this player or do this or that. It's just not that simple. Here's a telling example of that. The Yankees had a $14 million operating income. The A's, remember at the bottom of revenue, had a $15 million operating income. So nearly the same amount of operating income for the top spending and largest market and the bottom spending smallest market. So again, it's not that simple to say all these teams can afford whatever. And these numbers that I just provided here are also not that simple. And I didn't go into too much detail, though the Forbes article does reference how they came to these figures and who they spoke with, the different analysts and statistics departments. And they kind of get into how they compiled their numbers. So if you really want to dive in, check out this Forbes.com article called Baseball Team Values 2018 by Michael Zanian. So one of the things to note is these are the 2017 figures. So those numbers were up 4.7% from 2016. So revenue was up. The main reason being given TV deals, premium seats, and sponsorships. So revenues were up 4.7 between 2016 and 2017. But operating income and profits were down 17%. The reasons being given marketing, player development, analytics. So as you can imagine, a lot of that stuff is changing now. Marketing, we've got a whole new social media storm going, Twitter and Instagram and their websites and video and viral marketing and all this stuff that they're changing, things that they never really did before. So I assume they have to staff all these new departments and keep that content going. You've got player development. So there's always been player development, but teams are spending a lot more now on international markets, setting up schools, baseball schools for players and training academies, doing a whole lot more at the minor league system to get these players ready for the major league level. And then analytics, same thing. So sabermetrics are becoming a huge factor in the game. Teams are taking into account all kinds of analytics that they didn't formerly used to, and staffing those departments with all new database folks and analytics folks and programmers and software developers and all these guys to tell them which players to go spend money on. And so that's a whole lot of new expense that hasn't really been there over the last, it's been there the last several years, but it hasn't been there over the last several decades. Definitely, I would even say 10 years ago, they weren't spending that kind of money on marketing and analytics and player development. So some of those costs for them are increasing, which is decreasing their profits. So again, we think these owners are just raking it in, and they are, but they are definitely spending it in ways that they did not used to. So let's take a look at some of these payrolls and how they compare over the last several years. So in 2018, Boston had the highest payroll at $235 million, and Oakland had the lowest payroll at $68 million. St. Louis was right in the middle there, closer to the upper end at $161 million. Now, 10 years ago, in 2008, the Yankees had the highest payroll at $210 million, and Miami had the lowest at $21 million. So let's put that into perspective again. So 235 in 2018, 210 in 2008. So that's not a big difference 10 years apart. And actually that low end is quite a bit different. $68 million for Oakland, 21 for Miami. Now that's a little misleading, and I'll tell you why here. That those are really the outliers. So the Yankees were so far ahead of the second place team as far as what their payroll. The Yankees spent 210. The second highest payroll was the Mets at 137. And likewise on the bottom end, the Miami was 21 million. The next lowest was 43 million. That was Tampa. So, and everybody else kind of fell in line with just small increments. So outside of those huge increments with the Yankees and the Marlins, it kind of made sense that 10 years ago, the next highest salary was, or payroll was 137. Now we go 10 years before that, 1998, and Baltimore had the highest payroll at 71 million, and Montreal had the lowest at 8. And those weren't really outliers. Everybody else kind of slotted in within just a few million behind or ahead of those. So where did St. Louis compare? In 1998, they were at 44 million. Again, Baltimore was at 71. And in 2008, St. Louis was at 99 million. So they've kind of always been in that middle of the pack to the higher end. Definitely spending money. But, $161 million, the Cardinals' payroll this past season, I think a lot of fans aren't really aware of that. I can recall, kind of in that 10 years ago time frame when they were spending around $100 million. I kind of remember that $80 million figure floating around, and they sort of were around that for a while. As they crossed over 100, I recall that being, a big deal. Back when there were only a few teams spending over 100. But I mean, the Yankees, I remember when they were at, 180, and that was considered a lot, and approaching 200. And when Boston and the Yankees and the Dodgers all were in that $200 million range, that was just so much further beyond everybody else. For the Cardinals to be at 161 last year is, again, I think pretty surprising. They just aren't known. People don't think of them as big spenders. And to me, $161 million payroll is pretty big spending. So how do we get to those numbers? I'm not going to break down, all these different player salaries, but I think people need to understand when do players get paid? How much do they get paid at first? The minimum right now is $545,000. So, basically $500,000. But the average salary is $4.5 million. Now, again, 10 years ago, the minimum was $390,000 and the average was $3.1 million. And 10 years before that, in 98, the minimum was $170,000. So that's gone up a lot. But the average salary has always kind of been around 8 times what the minimum is. So that hasn't really changed. As the minimum salaries have gone up, the averages have gone up. And those minimums are determined in the collective bargaining agreement. The last one was, I believe, in 2016. I think it was for the 2017 season. So the players and the owners, have gotten together and decided on all these different figures and things. But so when a player first gets called up as a rookie, he's going to be chances are, getting the league minimum salary, which right now is about $500,000. The way that's structured is these players are under 6 years of control by the team. So the team can pay them the minimum if they want for 6 years. Now, actually, in reality, it's 3 years. And after 3 years, they reach what are called their arbitration years. So players and the management, owners, whatever, can try to negotiate a salary increase. And if they can't come to an agreement, then it can go to an arbiter who will decide the amount, and both sides have to agree to it. Generally, at least with the Cardinals, they don't reach arbitration. So they come to an agreement before it has to go to an arbiter. The player's agent will propose one salary, the team will propose another, almost always less than the player was proposing, and then they will try to meet in the middle somewhere. Otherwise, it'll go to an arbiter, and they'll pick one salary or the other, and one side will, quote, win or lose. But again, the Cardinals hardly ever go to arbitration. I believe last year they went to arbitration with Michael Wacha for the first time in I can't remember how long. And I believe he lost. And this year he did not go to arbitration. The Cardinals settled with all their players actually just recently. Wacha and Ozuna and Leon. So they kind of come to an agreement on a salary. So you can go from making that minimum $500,000 a year to these big increases. Maybe not big. I think Leon got like, I want to say 900,000, but maybe it was like 1.25 million. Where Ozuna is getting 12 million or 12 and a half. And last year I think he was getting 9 million, Ozuna. So that's in those arbitration years. It doesn't mean you went to arbitration. It just means you're in the years where you could, and you're going to start getting increases in salary based on your performance is basically all it comes down to. Your performance, your injury history, things like that. So, even though these guys are in their first 6 years, they're not necessarily making that league minimum after the first 2 or 3. Now, teams can also buy out those years through sort of an extension, or they can just kind of offer more money to keep a player happy, keep him under contract. Generally, what you would want to do, a team would want to do, is buy out those years for more money than they might normally get. The team is hoping that you're going to outperform the dollar amount, so that if you didn't take that contract and you played really, really well, then in arbitration, you might actually get more money. And they would extend it past those 4, 5, and 6 years so that it ends up being this kind of sort of a free agent contract where you buy out those arbitration years and maybe the first couple years of free agency at a smaller amount. So an example of that would be like Paul DeJong recently, I believe last season, signed a 6-year deal, I think, in that $30 million range. So at $5 million a year, that's a bargain for the team, but it also gives him some guaranteed money higher than the league minimum of those first 3 years. And even though, he might say, oh, I want to bet on myself and get more in arbitration in those years 4, 5, and 6, this is guaranteed $30 million, where if he was to get hurt or if his performance drops off, he's still getting that $30 million. If he gets hurt in his second or third year and can't even play in his fourth and fifth and sixth years, he's not going to get anything past that minimum salary those first couple of years. So it's a gamble by both. The team is hoping that he'll play better than this salary, and he's hoping, he's gambling that he'll get this guaranteed salary instead of what he might have gotten in arbitration. They did the same thing with Colton Wong and Alan Craig and Matt Carpenter, and a lot of these guys. Piscotty got a similar, what we would consider a team-friendly contract, even though they're not obligated to do that. They've got this player under control for 6 years and 3 years at a minimum salary. So this notion that these players aren't paid anything for the first several years is a little misleading. Now, it's possible there are guys who don't get big increases. They don't play every day. they're a bench player or a utility guy or whatever, and they get, nominal increases to the 1 or 2 million a year range. And, they might be saying, hey, I'd love to hit free agency sooner so I can go see what I can get from somebody else instead of you lowballing me every year for the first 6 years of my career. But a lot of these guys are, especially the guys who are earning it with, really good performances, they're getting paid really good money. There's guys just this season that are setting record amounts in their arbitration years. Arenado, I think, is about to. He's still under team control, but he's going to be getting. I think he's hoping to get $30 million a year for the season in arbitration. So, the good players especially are not hurting for money. But it's a union as far as the players go, and they're all kind of concerned with each other as a whole, and they're trying to get the highest salaries they can. Understandable, but I just think it's worth pointing out how they're getting paid in those first few years. Now, that being said, 6 years of control by the team, the average rookie age is over 24 years old. Now, and actually, the latest article I could find with data was 2012. At that point, the average rookie was 24 and a half years old. I did look, and they referenced for the last several decades, that average rookie age stayed about the same. Now, I would imagine this past couple seasons, the average rookie probably was a little bit younger, but not so far that it would throw that number way off. For the purposes of this argument, let's say 24 years old. Now, this past year, the Cardinals, I kind of looked up on my own, just went down the list of their roster, who were the rookies that got called up, and the average age of the Cardinals rookies was 23.7. So let's say 24, a little higher for the Cardinals, a little lower for that average. 24 years old. Now, with 6 years of control, you're going to be 30 by the time you're hitting free agency. So that's and a lot of teams now and fans are looking at 30, 31, 32 as you start declining. Now, I think statistics do show your peak season is 30 or 31, depending on the type of player you are. So in theory, you're hitting your free agency in your peak, but the teams who are signing you don't necessarily have those peak years to look forward to. They've hopefully already experienced, the last couple seasons approaching your peak, and you're really going to start declining. And a lot of these guys decline quickly after age 33, 34. So here you are about to hit free agency, your big payday, and teams are looking at you as a declining asset. Is that really fair to players? I don't think that it is, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Maybe how that can be rectified, but we'll get into that in a minute. So, one of the things that fans kind of take issue with on these massive contracts, but not just fans, the owners especially, are these big contracts are way too risky. 10 years, 8 years, 13 in the case of Stanton, for 200, 250, 300, 350 million dollars. Those are massive investments over a long term that rarely work out. Now, teams are getting away from that a little bit, but they're still, even recently within the last few years, have given out these 10-year contracts to guys, and they're already declining, getting injured. Their numbers are dropping way off. Albert Pujols would be the kind of prototype for that bad contract. The other reason that I think a lot of owners are kind of shying away from these big deals is the analytics are telling them not to. Obviously, sabermetrics analytics is a big part of the game and getting bigger and bigger every year. And they're really breaking down the numbers. What has this guy done? What is his value? We had a whole episode on WAR, and whether that's a good thing or not, but teams are definitely taking into account all these advanced statistics to determine whether or not a player is contributing, enough to a team. And what is the value of that? They can put literally a dollar value on a player's performance. We know he's done this, this, and this, and that's worth this much. and they don't want to pay more than that. Now, they'll pay a little bit more to get certain guys that they think are going to put them over the edge, but in general, these guys have a formula of how to pay a player, and if a guy wants way more than that, they're going to find that value somewhere else. So analytics are telling these owners not to pay these premium players these premium prices. And how can you really argue with it? Now, a lot of players do argue against the advanced metrics, especially when they don't go in their favor. But a lot of players are in favor of the metrics, especially the guys who think they are contributing more, but maybe their classic old school stats don't show it. But in reality, they are contributing value, and they want to get paid for it. Another reason that owners are less willing to kind of get into that crazy spending amount is the luxury tax. So that's a thing that a lot of fans probably aren't aware of or forget to think about. And it did adjust with the last collective bargaining agreement, but it's now fully in place. So they were phasing in this luxury tax, and as of the 2018 season, it is fully in place. So before the collective bargaining agreement, it was the level at which you would start paying a tax to the league was $189 million. So if you were under $189 million, you weren't going to pay any fee for spending that much. Now that amount increased to 195 in 2017, 195 million. So if you're under that, you're okay. 197 million last season, 206 million in the 2019 season, 208 million in 2020, and 210 million in 2021. 2021 is when the collective bargaining agreement expires, and we most certainly will see some pretty massive changes in a lot of aspects of the game regarding pay and salaries. So I think the free agency terms are going to change. The salary amounts are going to change. The minimum amounts are going to change. We're going to see all kinds of different things with the collective bargaining agreement, with draft picks and all kinds of stuff. But we'll see. We'll get into that maybe in a future episode. So right now for this 2019 season, the tax amount is $206 million. That's the luxury tax limit. Now it's 20% tax over that amount for a first-time offender. If you're a second-time offender, it's 30%. And if you are a third-time offender and up, it is a 50% tax on the amount over that luxury tax limit. So that's pretty hefty. A 50% tax on every dollar you spend over, $206 million. And again, we said Boston last season was at $235 million. So they were, at 197 last year, they were nearly $40 million over the luxury tax. So at a 50%, tax hit on that, it adds up quick for these teams who are already spending more than they probably would like to. So that penalty is now fully in place, and teams are aware of it. And if you go over a certain amount, there's even surcharges. I think you have to be 40 million past, which again, we said Boston nearly was last season. Then there's a surcharge that ranges from 12% to 45%. So these taxes really start adding up for these teams and, take that bottom dollar in their payroll and make it quite a bit more. So there's also a draft pick fee or fine that you pay. If you're 40 million over the luxury tax, your highest draft pick in the Rule 4 draft, the normal draft that we would think of, moves back 10 picks. So teams are valuing draft picks much higher than they ever have before, and that was another factor with the all the free agency. So when a potential free agent is offered the 1-year deal by the team that they're potentially going to leave, if they turn that down, that team gets a draft pick. It's a compensatory pick, compensation. So it slots in between the first and second round, I believe. So it's not exactly a first round pick. They go through the first round, and then all the teams that have these compensations picks get to pick in whatever order, and then the second round starts. So that was a big reason why players weren't getting signed. They'd be a free agent, and they had been offered that 1 year salary by their team, turned it down. So now that team that would sign that free agent has to give up a pick. They have to give their pick to the team that player came from. And teams don't want to give up those picks. They value those young, high first, second round draft picks, and they don't want to give them up, which means they're not going to sign that free agent who comes with a pick attached to him. So it was again, I think we're going to see that change in the next CBA. So this luxury tax issue, the tax going up, the amount going up for third-time offenders to 50%. You got these surcharges, and your draft pick moves back 10 picks. It's a big reason not to spend more money. So these owners have a lot of reasons to take it easy and keep salaries under a certain amount, or just in control, or be sensible about it. Now, fans in the past have criticized some of these big deals by their teams because it crippled the team. Now, usually it's in hindsight, but if you signed a player, when the Cubs had Soriano, you're paying this guy a huge amount. He's not performing. He's getting hurt. You're basically overpaying. You look at the Pujols contract, huge amount, long term, declining statistics. Fans don't like it, and it cripples the team's ability to make a move down the road. There were a lot of people that were glad that the Cardinals didn't sign Pujols, because if they had, then they wouldn't have been able to extend Yachty and Wainwright and give these other guys contracts, because all their money would be tied up in this one player. We've seen it countless times with big contracts given to one player, and then that team later says their hands are tied and they can't go get that, expensive player in the middle of the season to kind of give them a playoff boost. So in the past, I think fans have been very understanding of that and kind of didn't really like if a team took a risk on a player that had this potential to drop off. But now I feel like that's sort of flipped, where players are kind of saying, "Oh, it's not my money. Go get whoever, you should," and they get upset when the team doesn't spend all this money because they're not thinking of it as their own money, which, it's not necessarily their own money. It can be when you look at ticket sales, but it seems to have sort of flipped, where fans are much more on the side of the player and get what you can when you can, and they kind of hate on the owners and don't like this owner trying to make money mentality, but they don't mind the player trying to make money. So that mindset, in my opinion, has sort of changed over the last few years. Should it have? I don't know. Everybody kind of weighs in a little different, but I do think that there are some changes that can be made to alleviate some of this. I don't have all the answers, but just some potential points to bring up are, maybe we need to see players become a free agent at a younger age. So we said right now I don't know if on average, but on average they become a free agent around age 30. Is that really fair to a player to not be able to get the most that you can on the free agent market until you're going to be hitting your declining years? I don't think it's fair. At the same time, I understand why the owners and the teams don't want to change that. They want to control these players as long as they can. But I do think that you could adjust that somehow. Now, maybe you could have it be regardless of service time, you're going to hit free agency at a certain age. So, whether you're called up at age 19 or age 24, you're going to become a free agent at age 25, something like that. So, it would incentivize teams to call up players earlier at a younger age, so they have more control over them a longer time. They can kind of see how they're going to develop and, decide whether to commit to them in the long term. But there is obvious risk with that. As you bring players up younger and younger, they aren't going to be as ready. They aren't going to be as advanced. And you could potentially stunt their growth. Baseball is definitely one of those sports where it requires years of development to really achieve your potential. It's not like the NBA where guys get drafted and they're starting the next season, or the NFL where guys get drafted and they're starting right away, or especially, the premier, like a quarterback, used to sit out 3 or 4 years before he was considered ready to be the leader of a team. Now they might sit out 3 or 4 games before they're the starting quarterback. If that, they might just start right out of camp. So baseball is just not that way. Even the best, absolute best, youngest players, think of Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg and those guys, it takes them at least a couple years to get called up. I think Michael Wacha was one of the fastest to make it to the big leagues after being drafted, and even that was around a year. So baseball is a sport that requires development. And even when guys do get called up, you still kind of don't really know what you got from them for 2 or 3 years a lot of times. Think about Colton Wong. He was called up, and I think the next season maybe he got that 5-year extension. It might have been 2 seasons later. But he was getting this 5-year contract, again, for a team-friendly price. But even a couple years into that contract, it was, well, we think he can turn into the player that we hope. So it's sort of like you're locking these guys up on a team-friendly price, hoping that they'll turn into something good, and then hopefully you'll sign them again, maybe to an extension. So it's dangerous on both sides. It's dangerous as a player to be called up at such a young age, because you might just be thrown into the fire and you aren't ready to handle it yet, and you are going to fail, and teams could give up on you. You don't have time to prove yourself in a less pressure situation in the minor leagues. And as a team, when you've got a team full of these younger guys, you don't know what you can count on. They don't have a track record. You don't know how they're going to perform under pressure. You are going to have to kind of hit or miss on some of these guys. And honestly, I think, in my opinion, that's a problem the Cardinals have had over the last 3 or 4 years, is they've committed to some of these younger guys. Think Steven Piscotty and Randall Grichuk, who were kind of being touted as the next young core and these future all-stars and all this. And they got, small extensions out of it. Piscotty did. DeYoung has. Some of them worked out, like Paul DeYoung. Colton Wong is still kind of on the fence. We'll see. But some of them didn't. Piscotty kind of didn't when he was here. There were extenuating circumstances. Grichuk definitely did not pan out the way people had hoped and thought. But that's sort of the risk you take with younger players. You kind of never know. Now, if you let those guys season in AA and AAA for several years, then you do kind of know. You know what this guy's done over the long haul at a certain level. You know what the competition's been. You know how he's done. And he's going to have a certain adjustment. But a lot of those guys, you say, well, they might have, a couple months of adjustment as opposed to a couple of years of adjustment. So that's a risk you take with bringing up players at a younger age. But at the same time, I think some players for sure would be willing to risk that for a higher payday at an earlier age. And I think teams, as much as we talk about owners that don't want to pay the players, I think they do want to pay them. They just want to pay the right players the right amount. They don't mind spending a lot of money on a player as long as it's the right player, as long as it's a guy you can count on to perform at a high level and give you the return, that value for years to come, hopefully longer than the years of that contract. Nobody wants to give out an 8-year deal when they're pretty sure you're only going to get 4 or 5 years of quality performance out of it. You'd want to give a 4 or 5 year deal. And, you at that point, you do. The risk of a shorter deal is that the player is really good into their 6th, 7th, and 8th years of the deal, but they decided to go somewhere else after 5 years. And so you lost that player when you could have had him for 8 years. But I think that's a risk owners would be willing to take. And I think they're showing that now by not giving out these long-term deals. And honestly, I think players need to adjust to that. They need to realize, look, these 8-year deals aren't working out for anybody. It's hurting the value of the product overall when, in general, owners and fans look back at a contract and a player as being a bad deal because it didn't work out in the last third of the deal. Well, let's get rid of that to where you've got a 5-year deal and it works out all 5 of those years. You look back on that player as a great signing, a great player, the fans like him. And then if he wants to go get a 3-year deal after that, it's going to be at an adjusted price where teams and players both expect that his performance is going to drop off in those later years. Fans are going to expect it, especially when the dollar amount is tied in with that. So if a guy was getting 25 or 30 million a year on that 5-year deal, now he's a free agent again, but now he's 33 years old. Maybe he's only going to get 18, 20 million a year, maybe 15 in the last year. When you have those appropriate dollar amounts tied to that player in those years, fans are more forgiving when their batting average drops off or their on-base percentage or their home run totals go down. Players or owners aren't as upset and try to unload a guy because, oh, we're paying him all this much and he's not performing. You reset those expectations. I think it would have a benefit on everybody involved. Maybe not the bottom line. Maybe you didn't, get one over on the owner and get this massive payday. But then I think the long-term effects of these big paydays with diminishing returns is hurting the game, and it's hurt the players, and they're seeing it now because I think they're still expecting those big paydays, the long-term contracts with the high AAV. So I think we just need to, players need to reassess what they should be worth. Another thing that needs to kind of happen as far as pay is I think the minor leagues need to get more money. That's not a novel concept. People have been saying that for a while now. It's bordering on criminal what minor league players are paid. But especially, I think, at that AA and AAA level, when players might stay at those levels for years, as we discussed, in kind of conditioning a player, getting them ready for the big leagues, they might be there a while. Some guys never get out of AA and AAA. They'll, not never, but Tommy Pham and Jose Martinez were good examples of, they were in the minors up to like age 30. They were there for years. Some guys are just like that. They blossom late, or they're in a particular situation where they've got an all-star ahead of them on the major league roster and they just don't get a chance to get called up or whatever. There's all kinds of reasons, but some guys do stick around in the minors for a really, really long time. And they're getting paid very, very small amounts of money. It's not enough to live on, really. Definitely at the lower levels, the single A's and the fall leagues and all that stuff. But generally, if you're a good player, you're kind of moving your way up through rookie ball and A ball and high A and all that. You're moving up through those systems pretty quickly. If you're good, you're going to find yourself at AA before too long. But again, you might be at that AA, AAA level for a couple years, 3, 4, 5 years, and still be a good player who's going to get the call up eventually. And, you're going to get your league minimum at least. But it could be a while, and I think they need to compensate those players more, take the pressure off of them. I mean, we've heard stories of guys, all-stars in the big leagues, who nearly quit the game in the minors because they thought they weren't ever going to get called up. They had a family to support. They couldn't afford to do it. They went and got jobs bagging groceries or whatever because they had to make ends meet. So I think that, and that's obviously got to be stressful on a player and his family, and stress leads to all kinds of negative issues on the field. It can result in a lack of confidence, and confidence is everything in sports. So I think if you just, it doesn't have, I'm not talking millions to minor league players, but increase those salaries to a reasonable level where it can almost be considered an achievement to make a financial achievement to make a minor league AA, AAA team. And, you can, if you're paying those players more at the minor league level, you might have more incentive to call them up and see what they can do for you at the major league level. So I think it would kind of balance out everywhere. It would help the players mentally, obviously financially, and I think it would kind of help get that ball rolling of getting players brought up earlier, get that service time started earlier. I think maybe instead of 6 years, we go shorter, like 4 years, or we just pick an age. If you get called up at age 24, you're still going to be a free agent at 25. And that's on the team to decide. Is that smart? Do we want to only have 1 year to know if this guy's a good player? Whatever. So that's one potential way. Another would be performance incentives. Now, we've seen that some with, if an all-star bonus or a lot of these awards, Cy Young Award or Silver Slugger, you get a $500,000 bonus or $200,000 bonus or whatever for achieving certain awards. But I think it needs to be when they could consider much more incentive based. So, here's a 4-year contract at $10 million a year. But if you have this batting average or hit this many home runs and hit this many RBIs, then you're going to get $25 million. Make it big increases. Give these players reason to hit the incentives. But also, if they don't, for whatever reason, whether it's injury or they just aren't playing as well or something, then the owners aren't on the hook to pay this exorbitant amount for a lack of performance. Now, you could definitely abuse that. You could have owners telling the manager, hey, bench this guy today. I don't want him to, bring his average up, because if he does, I got to pay him an extra $5 million. Or, hey, I want you to take all of our players and rotate them out 2 days a week. I don't want to see them in the lineup 7 days a week. So I don't know if that would really happen. It could. And I think if it did, you'd have to, players would try to find a way to prevent that from happening. But some kind of incentive-laden contracts where if a guy just does what he's reasonably expected to do, what he expects to do, maybe what he has been doing for the last couple of years, then he's going to get that big contract that he's hoping for. But if he doesn't, we scale it back to a reasonable amount that still pays him a hefty price, but takes the burden off the owner for not getting the performance that he's investing in. So those are just some kind of off the cuff ideas that, how you could maybe make this better, more fair to both sides. I think the issue is it has been unfair to owners to, and they've done it to themselves. All it takes is one team to offer up that 10-year deal for $300 million or whatever, and then everybody else feels like they have to do it too in order to have a chance at getting a guy. So, but it's not fair to sign a guy to these 10-year deals and have to pay him regardless of his performance. Now, is it fair? Yes, because the owner decided to do that, and he signed the line just like the player did. But I feel like it's sort of over time gone that way it's just gotten out of control. Owners feel like they have to in order to have a shot at a free agent, and the teams that can't afford to do it to make sure they get the guy that they want. So, that's that Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers mentality of we're just going to outspend the competition because we can, and which makes it that much tougher for all the small market teams. And they've tried to offset that with revenue sharing and things. But I think owners are finally wising up, realizing that the value isn't there. Analytics are proving that to them, and they're tired of risking long-term success with these long-term contracts. So they want short-term deals. They want to be able to move on from a bad deal if it happens. They want to be able to call in younger, affordable players who are showing to give them value. And again, that the analytics are showing that. So I think it's time for change. I think we're seeing it now. Some of the players are still upset about it. You're going to see these tweets like we see from Arrieta telling players to watch out and being upset about the only $75 million 3-year deal that he got. But I think they're wising up. I think the collective bargaining agreement is going to cause some major changes after the 2021 season. We may see a strike. Who knows? We may see lots of major adjustments in the way rosters are put together and finances are spent. So let me know what you think. Do you think players are overpaid? Do you think owners are making too much? Do you think it's all fair? It's a free market where everybody can get what they can get and pay what they want to pay. Should fans continue to want to go to games and pay these increasing ticket prices? Though I do think that's kind of they're helping that out a little bit with these dynamic ticket deals where you pay less on a Tuesday to watch the Reds than you do on a Friday to watch the Brewers or whatever. So. They're gouging you for those premium games, but they're also giving pretty good deals on the other games, and they're putting in food packages and stuff, and really making it pretty enticing these days to take your family to a ball game. It's still super expensive, and beer and soda and hot dogs and everything is crazy expensive. But hey, it's America's pastime. People are willing to pay it, and especially here in St. Louis, the Cardinals have the best fans in baseball. So they're coming out, and I think they will. It would take, I think, a pretty glaring lack of effort by ownership to put a competitive product on the field before fans would kind of, turn their nose up at it. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I do think the DeWitts and the ownership have proven to put a competitive product on the field. They've proven every year to try to improve, not to everybody's satisfaction every year, obviously, and we're going through this playoff drought right now. But I think fans in St. Louis particularly can be happy with the product and happy with the spending and lack of spending on some of these crazy contracts. So I think we should be happy here. I think the rest of the league is kind of coming around on being more sensical with the types of contracts they hand out. And players need to come around too and be more realistic about what to expect from themselves and their peers. So let me know what you think. You can contact us on Twitter or Instagram at BFIBs Almanac. You can email Gmail, bfibsalmanac@gmail.com. You can see us and comment on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast on YouTube. Follow, like, refer your friends, coworkers, whatever. Subscribe with your favorite podcast app. That's definitely what we want to see. Subscribe, get those auto downloads, make it ready and waiting for you when every episode comes out. Podcast Addict is my podcast app of choice. Podcast Addict. Pocket Cast is another good one. If you got an iPhone, Apple Podcast and iTunes, Google Play Music, we're out there on all the big podcast sites. So subscribe, like, follow, all that stuff. And let me know what you think. Answer our trivia questions. So we got another one here. This week's trivia question is, which Cardinal pitcher won Game 1 of the 2006 World Series? Which Cardinal pitcher won the first game, Game 1 of the 2006 World Series? Let me know on social media. You can contact us on Twitter, Instagram, and you'll get back a follow and a shout out on the podcast. So next time we're going to get into an episode on, is there such a thing as clutch? That's what we were going to talk about this week, but I decided to pivot into the salary issue. So for the next time, it'll be, is there such a thing as a clutch hitter, a clutch performer? Some of you think there is, some of you think there isn't. We're going to get into what's the reality of clutch. So until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.